History bears witness to the enduring nature of the human spirit. Silenced voices, like dormant embers, retained the capacity to reignite the flames of dissent. The very act of suppression becomes a catalyst for resilience, and the oppressed masses, bound by a common desire for freedom, find ways to transcend the constraints imposed upon them.
The protest marches of the 1970s in Grenada were not merely demonstrations. They were a testament to the indomitable spirit of the people who refused to be silenced. Through the lens of time, we shall hear of the stories of those who marched, those who resisted, and those who paid the heavy price for their conviction. We present a chapter of history marked by courage, dissent, and the unyielding spirit of the people. We explore the early 1970s in Grenada, a time when voices of opposition for change were silent under the government of Eric Gary. From the streets here in St. George's, Grenada, to the corridors of power, this is a story of protest, resilience, and the pursuit of democracy in the face of adversity. Now, prior to the marches, Grenada witnessed the return of a number of individuals who were seeking political leadership roles on the island.
The tension between the older working class people that had got into power in the 1950s and these new young guys that were turning up, who were the sons of this privileged family, there was a tension and a conflict. Now, it became rather difficult for those guys and women to get into power through the ballot, because they then had to get the confidence of traditional working class people. And most of these parties had copied the United Kingdom, and when they set themselves up at the beginning of the 50s or the late 40s, they chose the Labour Party. So all of them were basically Labour Party and Labour oriented. And so these new ones that were coming up with their kind of modern influence that they had brought back from their universities, the working class majority did not really have the confidence to vote for them. And therefore they lingered up into the 70s. They were not getting traction, and they were not getting power, but they really were criticizing and of great concern. We also have to remember, you know, the Odlums and all the others that were in St. Lucia, Rosie Douglas and everybody else that was in Dominica, even Ralph Gonzalez, the radical in St. Vincent, and other names associated with them. They were putting pressure there as well.
I became aware of the politics in Grenada, I would say back in the late 70s. I went to a school called St. Paul's Government School. And if you know anything about St. Paul's in Grenada, St. Paul's was kind of a hotbed of political activity. People in the area always saw themselves as kind of above the rest. And therefore, the fight against the whole Gary regime at the time actually kind of had a lot of the players coming from St. Paul's, including Maurice Bishop himself. I remember in the 1970s, there's an interesting dichotomy because you had a group of guys who were from St. Paul's who were in the Gary camp. Actually, some of them were part of the Mongoose gang. And then you had some of them who were on the opposite side of the fence, fighting against the whole Gary construct. At that point, in a show of force in St. Paul's, you would have Gary launching his regular route marches. So the police force, armed with 3 or 3 rifles on their shoulders, would march down St. Paul's maybe once every 2 months as a show of strength. I remember just after the formation of what was then the New Jewel movement, which kind of represented the anti-Gary faction. You could not be seen with a copy of the newsletter, which I believe was then printed on a Xerox machine. actually distributed to homes in St. Paul's in the night or under the cover of darkness because nobody could see you walking around the street with a new jewel movement. So you used to take it from one house, you used to go to the next house and share it around as part of the way of building the momentum in the anti-Gary fight. In those days, I remember people like Eunice Whiteman, who I knew very well, Bishop, of course, who grew up in close proximity to us as family. Our family and his family became quite close because my father would work in his father's business. They had a gas station. Growing up there, we had a relationship where we called Morris Uncle Morris, and his children called my mom Auntie Helen or Uncle Seppi. So that was the background to the relationship with the bishops. His wife, Auntie Angela, that's how we called her growing up. I remember one particular time when one of Gary's route march is passing down St. Paul's. Maurice Bishop runs upstairs into our house and was kind of peeping out of the window to see the route march because he could not be seen by the police because, of course, for fear of the current environment. And it was not long after that him, Kendrick Radix, and so on were beaten up by Gary's Mongoose gang.
That sort of violence existed in Grenada in the 1970s. The unfortunate thing is that independence for Grenada is 1974, but 3 months, 4 months prior to that, there's a whole lot of upheaval. So this is November 1973. And the NJM has decided, okay, we're going to have a People's Congress.
We, the New Jewel Movement, held a People's Congress on 4th November last. At that Congress, the government was put on trial and was found guilty of 27 major crimes against the people. As a result of that, we gave them 2 weeks within which to resign. Now, on the day before the resignation was due to take effect, November 18th, 6 of us journeyed to Grenville to address businessmen there. And on that occasion, there was brutality, the like of which was never seen in Grenada before.
Bloody Sunday is the 18th of November, and it's Dame Hilda Bino's birthday.
The show yesterday at Queen's Park, you must have enjoyed it. Wonderful, wonderful.
And whilst Gary is enjoying himself at Dame Hilda's birthday party, his boys are beating up Morris and them up in Grenville.
On Sunday, November 18th last year, 6 of us went to Grenville to address businessmen there. On our arrival, the place we were supposed to meet them was cordoned off. And while we were waiting to meet them at the new venue, about 80 secret policemen came and stood up opposite us. After a while, a senior inspector came and invited these police aides to attack us. And in the course of that, 3 of us were severely beaten. We were beaten with axe handles, clubs, bottles wrapped up in newspapers, things like that. Beaten for about 200 yards through the streets of Grenville and then taken to the police station, where our hair was shaved off, our beards were chopped, and where we were made to lie in a cell about 10 feet by 6 feet, 9 of us, for the whole night before we were taken to the courts the next morning. It was the most horrifying experience imaginable.
The police aides have been totally dismissed, put it this way. They were working for us. And the people are saying that they're still in operation. The people that are simply malicious. I mean, some people make it a point of duty to distort and to tell lies. We're not into this. We just work and do things just very simply.
You didn't say why were they appointed in the first place?
They were appointed to assist the policemen. They had no power of arrest or anything like that. But this again is a civic duty for anybody called upon by the police to help should help.
It led to an outcry from the Grenadian population. Demonstrations would have started. The ports closed down. I was told there was no milk for me. Okay, I'm aging myself. But at that point, because the port is now closed.
Bloody Sunday now becomes associated with Dame Hilda Bino and so on. And then her son wanted to join the march against Gary. But his mother is head of state. And out of deference to his mother, he decided not to go. when the demonstration is passing in front of Government House and Dame Hilda is looking down at the proceedings, people saw and they say, down with the governor too.
There was also a situation where one named Jeremiah Richards got shot in Grenville when they demonstrated against Gary. So you had those two incidents again that consolidated more the forces of the New Jewel movement.
I remember one of the days, I think it may have been around 1973, when we were in school at the time, and at some point during the day, there was a rumbling that something was happening. Nobody could quite exactly put their fingers on what. But just before the lunchtime, I believe, in St. Paul's Government School, everybody began to run. And so we began to run as well as young students. You ran home, and we were not living far away. So everybody ran home. And then it was later in the day that a group of guys had gathered on what is called the Greens, which is kind of a roundabout, a major square in St. Paul's, a major Lyman spot in St. Paul's, as it were. And a number of persons from the police force had 6 or 8 people coming up the street, and there were a group of guys sitting on the circular platform. And the police told them, and these were also good friends as well, eh? Some of them were good friends as well, but no, they were on separate parts of the political divide. And they came up and said, disperse. And one of the guys said, well, we ended nothing. Why are we dispersing? Why are you telling us to disperse? And there was an exhibition of brutality there for just a response to the police. And we saw it as kids because we were standing in our house. We were right on the side of the street. So we could see all this happening right in front of us, kind of. So I kind of saw some of that in the closing of the Gary era. And then, as I said, people like Maurice and people like Kendrick Radix as well were close to family. So when they were beaten up as well, there was an interesting situation, because I remember some people complaining that people took different positions. One is, well, if they challenge the man, meaning Gary, they look for what they get. Some others were, of course, sympathetic and saying, well, this time he's gone too far. But you always heard those things. You didn't think that anything would come of it, really.
The New Jewel movement was consolidated. There were incidents where there was massive training and attempted assassination on Gary leading up to the revolution.
People have tried to get rid of me, and I don't think they can make it. Lots of them who have tried are lying in the cemetery.
How did they die, Prime Minister?
How are they doing?
How did they
die? Natural causes.
And eventually, one of the henchmen of Gary got shot. Also, his name, Sim Innocent Belma, got shot. And I believe that again emboldened the revolution to believe now that they can actually move on Gary. So leading up to the revolution, there was a lot of action. And where I am from the village of Tivoli. And in Tivoli, some of the guys was actually very, very revolutionary. They carry arms. So there was a situation where over 20 rifles were stolen from the cadets, because the cadets were sometimes being trained. And I believe most of those rifles ended up in my village. And because those guys, they were part of the military wing of the revolution. So all that was taking place prior to March 13, 1979.
So the 1970s were, I mean, tumult. And I remember as a little girl, you know, and this, of course, combined with what was happening globally in terms of the oil shocks of the 1970s. This meant that the ports were closed. So you had a combination of economic, political, and social forces coming together to create a serious period of destabilization in Grenada.
This situation of upheaval lasts November of 73 into January of 74.
January 1974 was one of the most probably traumatic periods in Grenada's history. When the island was shut down, there were demonstrations every day, tens of thousands of people were on the streets.
businesses that are open today are enjoying the privilege of getting the fair share of the cake, perhaps which they never got before. It's good business for those that are open. Those that are closed, they'd get tired someday and they'd reopen sometime.
Don't you plan to enforce that law that was passed quite recently, requiring that they not close except on days approved by government?
We'd have to test the law. The law is no respecter of any person at all. The law has been passed and they must keep within the law. They're breaking the law today, and in due course the matter will be taken up in courts.
The immediate reason for the present shutdown was the fact that on November 18th there was brutality, the like of which was never seen in Grenada before. As a result of that, mainly, the Chamber of Commerce, the Law Society, both on the very next day, followed by the unions, workers in all spheres, in fact as many as 22 different organizations, came out and joined together and began a massive protest. That led to a shutdown, and later on was followed by a number of street marches, which is what is still going on today. That, as I say, is the immediate reason. The background reason, of course, has to do with the general economic situation in the country.
The main issue is that of human rights. The Committee of 22 came into being because of alleged brutality and so much breakdown of law and order in the state. So we rallied together various organizations in an effort to form a common front.
So what are you hoping to achieve out of all this?
Out of all of this, we are hoping that we would be able to bring back the state to its former position, where people were free to express themselves, they were free from molestation, searches by police, unwanted searches, and to be free in all the true aspect of it.
How successful do you think you've been so far?
Well, I think from the demonstrations we have been having, persons are rallying day after day to the cause. However, we have not seen any tangible move towards implementing 4 points we made to government on the matter of human rights.
The governor, Dame Hilda Bino, resigned. She left the island during this state of emergency and moved to Trinidad.
Meanwhile, as the political landscape tightened its grip, dissenters found themselves on the front line, standing up against a government that welcomed absolutely no opposition. The air was thick with calls for change, echoing throughout the streets of St. George's, Grenada and beyond. But with change came resistance, and the struggle for democracy became a battle for the very soul of the Spice Isle.
On January 21st, 1974, in a big demonstration, there's a clash between Gary's secret police on the Carenage with demonstrators.
There are hundreds of school children, and we're talking teenagers from throughout the island who have come to demonstrate against Gary.
In St. George's, there was a confrontation of government and opposition supporters, and one man was killed. Several others were reported injured. One demonstrator who managed to escape to Barbados, even with injuries, was the president of the Housewives Association, Sybil Lagrenade.
Well, we assembled as usual at Otway House and started our demonstration at about 9:45. We demonstrated through the streets of St. George's as usual, ending up again at Otway House at about 11:45. When we got there, the chairman spoke to us, after which I addressed the crowd. After I had spoken, a GBSS student addressed the crowd, and while he was so doing, the chairman took the microphone from him and told us that Gary's secret police were advancing towards the Carenage in our direction. He advised us to stand aside when the men drew near and to allow the secret police to pass. The crowd obeyed him. The secret police came marching with brandishing cutlasses in their hands, axe handles and big stones. They marched and they passed along, and I made the sign of the cross, thanking God that nothing had gone wrong. But I was mistaken. When they got to the coal store, they then turned around and attacked us violently. No one in our crowd had attacked them at all. No one had bothered with them. We had just allowed them to pass. But these people stoned us. Then a sweet drink truck came along, and they used these sweet drinks to throw at us, injuring several hundred people. Then they attacked us at the Otway House, throwing stones. We were trapped in there in one room, about 20 or 30 of us. My brother-in-law, who was killed a few minutes later, being also there with me.
Maurice Bishop's father, Rupert Bishop, is at the front of the building. It's called Otway House, actually. And he's trying to save, if you want to put it that way, children and women who were in the building. And he was shot and killed by the Mongoose gang.
It's not clear exactly what surrounds it. Some said they went for Maurice Bishop, but they got the wrong bishop. Maurice Bishop was not there, but his father was part of the demonstrations. And many Grenadians were. You know, I think my father used to carry a cross every day in these demonstrations, and it's read, "We are burdened by Garyism." Actually, there's a picture from one of the Barbados newspapers with him in this photo, you know. And that's how I saw that whole period. A little boy, that's how I saw through the eyes of, you know, my older brother, who was part of some of the youth organizations within the NJM and stuff like that, and my sister, who they went to these demonstrations. There was one, I do recall one time when we were close enough. We were coming from school. I think the school had not closed yet, and we had to go to this office and hide because we were tear gassed. There was tear gas everywhere, and I have this memory of that as a little boy. So it really was a traumatic period. The looting that went on, we had all over stores. They said that it was revenge for the stores that had shut down. So they were attacked, and people were looting. I saw people carrying beds, like mattresses on their head. There were jokes about people stealing lawnmowers and they didn't even have grass in their yard. People they said they were stealing dog food because they thought it was corned beef. And, you know, so there were all these stories that, you know, I remember somebody stole stuff and I got some stuff, like chocolate and stuff, and I took it home and my mother's like, "Could you get that stuff away from my house, please? That does not belong here." So I couldn't even eat the stuff from. So it really was a real difficult period, even though I think many Grenadians saw it as a good period because we got independence. So there's always been that conflict around independence because there were a lot of people who supported it and a lot of people who did not.
The government has given the impression abroad that Grenadians are against independence. Grenadians are not really against independence. What they are against is Garyism. They are against independence under Garyism because they have seen what Gary has done prior to independence, and they are afraid of what he will do after independence. We are all for independence, but we are against the Gary government, and we intend to get rid of them.
I won't say much about independence, but we're fighting for freedom because I feel Gary must go. We're suffering in this land too much. Gary must go.
Right now the situation is that we've been oppressed, and independence would never mean a thing to us. Independence don't mean anything. That's all I have to say.
Independence, it's something good, but in a place like Grenada where we are a little behind, you know, we should wait until we see that independence is, you know, until we see that we could really get something out of it before we push ourselves back. And honor a person like Mr. Gary, who likes a lot of squandering and things like that.
Well, in truth and in fact, independence has sort of faded into the background now with the crowd demonstrations you have been having in St. George's. This is today the 11th demonstration that has taken place since last Wednesday. And this morning with the Caribbean Congress of Labour here, the crowds have come out. But this isn't an anti-independence, because independence is really a secondary affair now. What the crowd seems keen on is getting Mr. Gary's government removed.
The business class and the so-called upper class, they were Gary was not a popular person. They did not like Gary, and I think Gary retaliated where some of the estates were acquired and there was a land for the landless program. So there was this animosity there. And then he wanted to take Grenada to political independence, and the people were feeling here that if Gary was so high-handed, that if we become independent now, that it will be worse. And so I know the New Jewel movement that was formed together with the business community, they were in total opposition to Gary bringing Grenada to independence.
The Chamber of Commerce feels that independence is a God-given right of every man or every country. But the Chamber of Commerce feels very strongly that Grenada is not ready for independence at this time. Grenada, it is well known that Grenada is not economically viable at the moment, and unless Grenada can improve her economy, then she is certainly not ready for independence at this time. The Chamber of Commerce came out very strongly on this point prior to May of last year. And as a matter of fact, if you will remember, there were shutdowns in May of '73 against the independence talks in London. Not against independence, but against the fact that we were not ready for independence at this time. Since then, of course, the position has changed drastically. Since November 18th, when there was evidence of indiscriminate beatings of people in Grenville town, and police brutality, and evidence that we have been slowly but surely becoming a police state. The Chamber of Commerce has had no reason whatsoever to change their opinion on the economic viability of Grenada, but they have certainly had reason to change their opinion as far as the political situation is concerned. And we feel very strongly that we will not be protesting at the moment, as we are, against the denial of basic human rights for people and calling for the resignation of government. In this context, we could not seriously consider supporting independence at this time under the present government.
So in the middle of all this confusion, the British government still went ahead and granted Grenada its independence in '74. And what is interesting is that the NJM, they were not against independence. They were against independence under Gary, because it meant he, legitimizing him as prime minister if Grenada gets independence with him.
The echoes of protest, the cries for justice, and the resilience that defined an era are etched into the very fabric of Grenada. In the face of adversity, the Spice Isle stood strong, a testament to the unwavering spirit that transcends time. And so, in the midst of turmoil, Grenada found its path to independence. Eric Gary's government, despite the challenges, led the nation into a new chapter of the island's history. The journey was fraught with struggle, yet the achievement of independence remains a pivotal moment in the story of the Spice Isle. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. The series continues next week at the same time.